if there was just one thing, I would say we need to overhaul this and we need to do it now, and if I had the money to throw at it, it would be, put simply, access to healthcare.
Every summer for over a decade, Manchester has hosted Sparkle, the National Transgender Celebration. The biggest gathering of its kind in the world, the weekend of events brings together members of the trans community in the heart of the gay village. This year we followed Ashleigh Talbot as she prepared for the weekend. I asked her to tell me where she was on her path to becoming a trans woman as we go behind the Sparkle.
Well, I'm 30. So one thing that's said about trans people a lot of the time is that you know from a very young age, and to be honest, I don't think that was the case with myself. I didn't, if you'd have asked me why I felt so disconnected and socially awkward when I was very, very young, sort of 6 or 7-ish, I wouldn't have been able to tell you, I think I want to be a girl. It was something that really only came along later on, as you start thinking about these things a little bit more, like, well, why? Okay, hang on, everybody else seems quite secure in who they are and happy with the things they're told to do as boys or as girls, and I'm not. What's with that? What's with me? And then I think the first time I remember knowing that was my path was I saw a trailer for a documentary that was broadcast many years ago about a woman who was transitioning, and up until that point I had no idea that such a concept even existed or that the thing was even possible. And then just from that sort of tiny speck of visibility, seeing this trailer for this documentary, I was like, right, okay, that's me. And I didn't want it to be, because I knew it was going to be hard and I would have to have quite a lot of difficult conversations with a lot of people. So I very much didn't want it to be the case, but eventually as time wore on and I got into my teens and started expressing these things, I was like, well, it looks like that's the way the wind is blowing, because I've tried everything else to try and make myself functional and happy without transitioning, and it's none of it's working. People just say, oh, can't you just dress up at a weekend, or can't you just try this? And it's like, well, I did try all of those things and it didn't work, and it left me in a really horrible place. So here I am now, essentially.
People seeking gender reassignment generally make their first approach to their GP, who'll then refer them to a gender identity clinic. The clinic will assess the patient, leading to a provisional diagnosis of gender dysphoria. There are currently 7 clinics in England and 1 each in Scotland and Northern Ireland. Where appropriate, psychological support can then be offered and life options and treatment possibilities are discussed. An individual care plan will be agreed with a patient. Then comes a phase of real-life experience where the patient lives life as if they'd transitioned. This can last between 1 and 2 years on average. At this point, endocrinology therapy is available, allowing the body to begin the hormonal transition from male to female or female to male. Then, a number of surgical options become possible, such as laser hair removal, although some trans people opt to begin these earlier through private routes. Treatment may include various speech therapies, some of which are surgical. The final key phase is the physical gender reassignment, which can involve a number of surgical procedures. The patient will receive ongoing support and associated hormone replacement therapies.
In terms of where I am on the process, I am of course waiting for the NHS. I have been to Charing Cross now a couple of times, the second time being earlier on this year. So in fact what's going to be coming through reasonably soon, I am told, is in fact my prescription for estrogen and various, the hormones and the way they're administered to you, as well as vocal therapy, which you might be able to tell that's something that might mean quite a lot to me. So that's coming. There still hasn't yet been anything physical that's happened, apart from at a point when I was feeling a bit flush, I did have IPL, intense pulse light laser, to thin out my facial hair, and it thinned it out, but it's certainly not gone away. You may be able to see. So I think I'm essentially socially, I'm fully transitioned because I changed my name. My whole family know, all of my friends know, everybody knows. It's just I'm waiting for the actual transition part of the transition to finally start. I know in my parents' case, I was terrified of telling them. I was so scared that they would just completely reject and ostracize me, and they'd be like, no, we don't want to see you anymore. I was so scared of that. That's what stopped me from telling them for so long. They were, in fact, more or less the last ones to know, which was a point that, you know, my dad raises, like, well, why are we the last to know? Don't you trust us? Like, well, of course I trust you. I was just so scared. So there have been differing reactions. I think, to be honest, most of my friends, they kind of knew already, because, you know, I've never really made that much of an effort to hide the fact that I wear makeup and eyeliner and whatever. It's just, it then became, you know, the latest progression in this aspect of myself. Like, so, you know, what does this mean for you? My friends would ask, like, you know, are you going all the way? Is it just something you do occasionally? I was like, well, I honestly don't know. I'm still working it out. I'm sure I'll tell you when it crops up. So when the time came to say, okay, I'm transgender, I'm doing this, most of them were already kind of mentally braced for it. In fact, I remember I was in a band at the time. So I came out to the guitarist, the singer, the drummer, and they'd all had a rough awareness already.
Transsexual.
Transvestite noun, a person, especially a male,
Gender
who assumes the dress and manner usually associated with opposite sex.
Over time, more different gender identity does not correspond to that.
Well, one to avoid is definitely tranny, because that's a word that's usually only ever used to abuse and insult, and I've had that word shouted at me so many times on the street, on public transport and whatever, and I know people say, oh, it's empowering, we should try and claim it back, but no, it isn't, for me. But I would describe myself, I'm transgender. I'm a transgender woman. I occasionally just use the phrase, I'm trans, in the same way that you don't say, I'm homosexual, you say, I'm gay, or I'm a lesbian, or whatever. So, I think there is a lot of confusion about the terminology. I mean, as I say, I myself, it's transgender. I also have been known to use the phrase transsexual, because in the medical sense that's what's going on and that's the name for it, but then there is the conversation to be had about, is that really the right phrase? Because there's heterosexual and homosexual, and transsexual isn't something about your orientation so much as who you are. So that does make me question, is that an appropriate term? So there are people who are cross-dressers, there are people who would describe themselves as transvestites, and that's traditionally taken to mean people that don't intend to transition. They just express themselves in, you know, a gender variant way for, you know, one of a number of reasons, to relax or to, you know, to go out. It's, you know, it's all over the place. So transgender woman, trans, it's all good as long as it's not that particular variant of the T word. So YouTube helped, definitely, because I think my burgeoning independence as a young adult kind of coincided with the rise of YouTube, and there are so many makeup tutorials on there. Initially I was just using this foundation that I thought, okay, that's got good coverage, and then someone suggested a different one, and then someone suggested this one, and I tend to find myself being relatively loyal. If I know something works, I will stick with using that, and I can't say as I experiment particularly often on a daily basis. You know, I tend not to even wear eyeshadow for work. I just do this, basically. If I'm wearing eyeshadow with glittery bits in it, it's a special occasion. So I do ask myself, what was it that set me thinking in that direction? Is it that initially when I was a kid I just sort of preferred the way the clothes looked and preferred how girls got to be really girly? Why have I decided in myself that this is how I want to look? And I couldn't tell you what the answer is to that question. I'm fairly sure there are whole reams of doctoral research to be written on it, but at the moment, it's just I quite like the way it makes my face look. It smooths it out. It kind of gets rid of the 5 o'clock shadow with the stubble, and it allows me to, you know, emphasize certain things like my eyes and my lips. I just like the way it looks, to be honest. I just want to go about my business and have my day, and, you know, feel normal about it, feel accepted with it. So I think in terms of tips, it's good to experiment, although it's expensive to experiment, which is the problem. But see what advice you can pull from YouTube. See what advice you can pull from friends, if you have any, who experiment with that sort of thing. Plus, you know, the best thing, of course, is to befriend a makeup artist and get them to do it for you, but that doesn't come on very often, of course. But it's a case of finding your own way of self-expression, and if that's doing makeup in an archetypally feminine way, so be it. Whereas if you're just using it to add a bit of shading or a bit of colour around the eyes, that's also absolutely dandy. That's what makeup's for, you know. I don't think I've got any one particular set of tips so much as just be yourself, really. Yes. Well, I mean, there are shops that cater for various elements of the trans community, but for one reason or another, I just haven't been to one for a long time. This is from Debenhams. I've got a lot of stuff from Debenhams and Marks and Spencer's and a couple of other places. Online shopping. Since the advent of online shopping, I found it much easier to get shoes, specifically. I have quite sizable feet for a woman, so I have to get, you know, androgynous male shoes and just try and wear them in a feminine way, or order in a ridiculous pair of heels. But, I mean, sparkle's particularly good for clothes. You see all sorts of things, don't you? Like, in fact, most of them literally sparkle. So...
Everybody! Holly came from Miami, FLA. It's like the way across USA. Ducked her eyebrows on the way, shaved her legs, then use a she says, hey babe, take a walk on the wild side. Say, hey babe, take a walk on the wild side. Candy came from out on the islands. In the back room, she was everybody's darling. But she never lost her head. Even when she was given head, she says, hey babe, take a walk on the wild side. I said, hey babe, take a walk on the wild side. And everyone sparkle, sing.
Well, I mean, one thing that I have noticed is that you're probably aware of this, as men, your clothes are measured, aren't they? You buy a 32 or 28 waist and however long leg. Women's clothes come in a size, and if that size doesn't fit you, sorry, you know. So I think I'm somewhere between a 12 and a 14. You know, 14 on the shoulders, definitely, but I've been known to fit into a pair of size 8 trousers. I think something that could perhaps be done that would benefit not just trans people would be to just institute a system like that across everybody's clothes. Why, you know, women have got this fairly arbitrary system of sizing and men get the measurements of their legs and waists, and it does make me question, well, why don't we just have everybody's the same and it's all sort of standardized, and you don't have to think, oh well, I'll order a size 8 and a size 10 in case, you know, one of them doesn't fit and I'll send the other one back. Now, online retailers, I'm fairly sure there are a good few members of the trans community who are already enthusiastically using online shopping, but it's the same as buying anything else. If it doesn't fit, it's got to go back and it's a faff, and sometimes, particularly for an expensive purchase or whatever, you want to go and try it on, you know. And I think what Primark have done recently with coming out and saying, you know, our customers can use whichever changing room they feel most comfortable with, I think an announcement of a policy like that across the board would again be absolutely fantastic. But it's just making sure that there isn't someone in a changing room somewhere being a fly in the ointment and deliberately saying, no, you can't come in because of something that they don't realise is now against the rules. So, you ask, what can clothing manufacturers do, what can retailers do? It's the same thing as everybody can do, just, be nice. Don't be horrible to people that want to buy things from you. The main thing I've noticed, and it's related to what we're doing right now, and it's visibility. Because just since I came out and started to transition, there has been, I don't know if a tremendous or an impressive upswing in visibility for transgender people, with people like Laverne Cox, Paris Lees, various other people going out, being advocates, speaking up for the trans community, and that is now visibly happening and there in the mainstream media, like Caitlyn Jenner, for example, and Kellie Maloney in the UK. So just those things happening and obviously happening and being published and spoken about, that's a huge step in the right direction, because that takes trans and gender variant people away from being essentially the butt of the joke, as I feel we may have been for a good few years, to a point where it's like, well, actually, these people are people. Maybe we should give them some credence, give them some support, perhaps. I
was just frightened people were staring at me, I was very conscious of being not accepted, because the one thing all us trans girls would like to be is just be accepted and to be seen as normal human beings going about our life. I think just be honest, be proud of who you are, and just look the world right in the eye and say, this is me, you either accept me or you don't. I'm not harming no one, I'm just living my life,
This may shock you, in fact, but I have been on the receiving end of transphobic abuse on Canal Street. It has happened where the attitudes of the people that you'd think would be the first ones behind you, the first ones to understand, and they're as horrible and insulting, as closed-minded as anybody else, and it's just, that hurts. That's disappointing, because it's like, you should know better. So yes, attitudes are changing, but I wonder if we could perhaps make it change a little bit quicker. I know that if you've heard of Schools Out, yeah, I know that they're engaging in some trans issues along with diversity role models as well. And I think it is important not just to give proper sexual and relationship advice and education to young children, rather than saying, oh, well, look, we're going to talk about making babies, but if you're gay or trans, you can just forget about this bit because it totally doesn't apply to you, but we're not going to learn anything that does apply to you because it's not straight. So yes, definitely there is a lot of stuff that could be done in schools, because in fact, children are pretty open-minded. They don't hate anything. It's like, you can, the key thing is education. It really is. And if children are being taught from a fairly young age that actually this stuff happens and it's okay, it's nothing to be scared of, it's nothing to take the mickey out of, it's a thing that happens as part of our world, what would the problem be, really? What would the issue be in educating the children who are there to be educated? That's, why they're in school. Specifically, that trans issues are being dealt with as a part of the story. We recently saw Banana by Russell T Davies. Now that had obviously the story of Helen and the revenge porn storyline.
The pressure was there from when I first got cast. I knew what this would mean, because at the moment I am currently 100% of all trans people on British television, and it is a real, it was, the time has come. For so long, our story's been told by other people. There's been a thing in the disability movement for years. Nothing about us without us, and I think finally the trans rights movement is sort of catching up with that, and I think it's about time that happened, because that's really what we need.
There's a series coming up on the BBC in the autumn, which is a comedy series called Boy Meets Girl, and that is again about a relationship between someone, a character who is trans and a friend of theirs, but it's not focusing specifically on them being trans and transitioning. It's a story about them, and so that's something different. And I think the same could be said in the US. As I've mentioned, Orange is the New Black. So it's not that it's a show that's specifically about a transgender person. It's a show with lots of people in it, one of whom is transgender, and it's, it does a lot of other things as well. So that, it's only a subtle difference, but it is making the difference.
As LGBT life moves on, you know, I can really remember the sea change after Queer as Folk came out in the late 90s, and how that went and changed sort of representation, and now we're reaching a point where we are starting to get lesbian, gay, bisexual and trans people in lots of TV shows. There are more and more times we're turning up in different things and being the focus of stories. I think things can only really get better from here. When I first came out, it was the end of the 90s, and being trans at the end of the 90s was kind of, trans rights were about 30 to 40 years behind gay rights, and now they're just 18 years behind, so, you know, we're doing well. We're catching up slowly, and it's only through organisations like the LGBT Foundation and now Stonewall that's also becoming more trans-inclusive and trying to become fully trans-inclusive that we're going to start making these changes, because for such a long time trans equality has led so far behind. And I know that when I came out it was still considered something to be shameful, something to be terrified of, and it still is. It still is. As much as I'm out and public about it, you know, it was one of the great things was being asked to be in Cucumber and Banana, to get an opportunity to make history as the first trans woman playing a trans woman in a leading role in a television series in the UK, which, you know, is an amazing opportunity. And as it was shown in the US last week, and because of things like Transparent and Orange is the New Black only being available via streaming, I believe that was the first trans woman to star as a trans woman in an American broadcast TV series. So
would we have had these things even, you know, 5, even 2 or 3 years ago, would these things have been happening? I'm not so sure. It's just things seem to have been building up for a little while now in a way I'm quite a fan of, because finally I get to watch media products in which people like me, people like my friends, are finally getting some proper, honest representation rather than being the butt of a joke. Access to healthcare, it's a big one, I think. There's also things like access to housing and employment. There are a lot of transgender people who are either unemployed or underemployed. There's a lot of discrimination, even just casually, you know, and with education is going to come across the idea that no, actually it's a bit rude to shout that to that person on the street. It's a bit rude to threaten them and have a laugh about it because you think it's funny. That's not nice. Can we stop doing that? But if there was just one thing, I would say we need to overhaul this and we need to do it now. And if I had the money to throw at it, it would be, put simply, access to healthcare. The medically necessary therapies, you know, psychologies, the talking therapies and the procedures that you can't get unless you spend years and years fighting for it every day of your life. The NHS have a thing where we're on a journey together, and it's like, well, yeah, but you can restrict us from accessing this healthcare. We can't do that to you. We can't stop you from getting something that you need because of what you are. We don't have that power. We don't have any power in the system, and that's problematic and rather upsetting.
Waiting times for gender reassignment surgery vary across the UK. Charing Cross Hospital receives over 100 referrals each month, with an average wait time for surgery of 67 weeks.
If there really is a commitment, then I think one thing that this government could start doing is perhaps listening to the voices of those affected by the issues that perhaps they, as politicians, wouldn't necessarily have gone through or understand. But they need to not ignore it. They need to not brush it under the rug and say we're committed to this, and then it turns out they're not really committed to it as such. They're just prepared to let it fall by the wayside. I'm possibly just too much of a cynic to believe that anything would genuinely get better just because the government says it will. So. Obviously we have equal marriage here as well, have done since last year, which is fantastic, but it has opened a rather interesting conversation because there's a document called a Gender Recognition Certificate, which you have to jump through various hoops to get, and you have to be approved by a board and have social justice and blah blah blah. The reason the Gender Recognition Certificate was brought in was as a result of the Gender Recognition Act of 2004, and the purpose of it was to allow people who had transitioned to then marry somebody in their acquired gender, not the gender that they've been assigned at birth. To say that yes, this person is a woman and can therefore marry a man, or vice versa. But now we have equal marriage, that calls the necessity of the gender recognition certificate as a document, calls that into question. For me, personally, because if the option is there to marry equally in any case, why then do trans people need to jump through hoops in order to be approved to do so on the basis of a previous generation's legislation, essentially, from 2004? Obviously I need to get a passport because I'm probably going to go on holiday before I get married, but what in fact you need for a passport is a signed letter from either your gender clinic or more commonly your GP, indicating that you have completed the social transition, the name has been changed, you are either on the waiting list or have had some treatment at the gender clinic. This is a permanent decision. Please, with respect, respect this individual's new name and gender. So that's good. Again, I just kind of haven't got round to it yet because you do have to pay for those things. This is going to be, I've been every year since I moved to Manchester in 2010. 2 years ago was my best one because I played with my band and we rocked. But more generally, it's described as a celebration of transgender life. There's live music which will be taking place in Sackville Gardens. There's also various stalls there, a lifestyle expo, I suppose. So there are shops and there are places where you can access perhaps a surgical consultation for feminized and facial surgery or something, if that's what you're interested in. But there are also some slightly more there are talks and workshops. So, for example, the chief executive of Stonewall, Ruth Hunt, is going to be delivering a talk on the Saturday.
Well, Stonewall's historically always been the lesbian, gay and bisexual charity, but after extensive consultation with over 700 trans people, we've now decided to bring trans people into our remit. So we're pursuing two streams of work, one about transing up everything we already do, and another about identifying trans-specific areas of work, like the law reform, health, education, where Stonewall can lend its weight and its expertise to support the trans community to achieve change.
The trans community for quite a long time hasn't necessarily had very much to celebrate until quite recently. The two main things in the social calendar for trans people in Manchester are Sparkle and Transgender Day of Remembrance, which is perhaps a little bit more serious in tone. There are, of course, all the things that you'd expect, drag performances and lots of strutting up and down on the street, again, if that's what you're into. But for me, it's just generally an excuse to go and hang out and be proud with all the rest of my trans friends. Which, it's lovely. I like being able to do that.
My letter, my gender identity clinic letter, turned up in the letterbox this very morning.
See you in a minute!
Yes, I know, it's exactly what I've been waiting for. And it's like, it's got all the stuff that's in there. Another copy's gone to my GP, as if it's turned up this morning on Sparkle. And furthermore, there's also two letters in it that have been countersigned by Dr. Richard Barrett, James Barrett rather, Dr. Barrett anyway, one of which is to the Passport Office and one of which is to the DVLA. So remember how I said how with a certain type of letter you don't need to get the gender recognition certificate to change those documents. Well, this letter will allow me to do that, again, get that female gender marker without the gender recognition certificate. So again, that calls the necessity of that document into question. But I just have to make my appointment with my GP now, take the letter along and say, okay, these things that it says to give me those, and I'll be making regular appointments with my GP from that point on to get my injections, essentially. And it's going to start, finally, things are going to start.
How does it feel?
Oh, it's pretty good. And today of all days for it to arrive as well. So I left the house, I'll check the mailbox. So I immediately ran back to my flat to open the letter. But yes, it feels great. Finally, something's about to actually start happening instead of all the waiting and they're getting frustrated and they're writing letters. It's here.